Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you all here. We might just wait a few more seconds to see if anyone else will join us. Okay, we might make a start then. We've only got the 45 minutes today and there's quite a bit to get through. So thanks everyone for joining us. This is the Direct Entry Program SIG's first session for 2021. And we're looking at the topic of the future of direct entry programs. So obviously, we've all been managing enormous change over the past 12 months and there's still a lot of uncertainty. And I think if anyone attended Minister Tudge's presentation this morning, I think you might agree that we're going to be in this state of uncertainty for a bit longer yet. And yeah, I'd also like to acknowledge that with the end of JobKeeper, I do understand a lot of centres are doing it very tough at the moment. But with that being said, I think there are plenty of opportunities for direct entry programs moving through this year and into next year. And we're really fortunate to be joined by three guests to give their perspectives on where we may be headed in the future. So with this session today, we'll begin with a panel discussion, which will run for about 25 minutes. And for that, I'd like to welcome Brett Blacker, the CEO of English Australia, Aparna Jacob, the Director of Studies for English Programs at UNSW Global Education, and Pankaj Pathak, the Managing Director of Phoenix Academy. Phoenix is a private college in Perth, which delivers award courses and ELICOS courses. So with the panel discussion, I'm going to ask our panelists three questions. It's unlikely we'll have time to take questions for the panel, but if you do have questions, please post them in the chat and we'll see if we can get to them. So after the panel discussion, we're going to split into breakout rooms and groups of 4 for about 8 minutes, just to give you a bit of an opportunity to discuss the key points from the discussion and share your own thoughts about where we might be headed. And hopefully we've got a bit of time at the end to get some feedback for the whole group. So very briefly with housekeeping, if you could please keep your microphones on mute. We are recording this session because there has been quite a lot of interest in it and I know not everyone can make it. I would encourage you to keep your cameras turned on if you feel comfortable doing this, because it does add to the sense of engagement for the speakers. But if that's not possible, we understand that. So we might make a start then. So Brett, I'll start with you on our first question, which is, what are some of the broad trends you've seen emerging among direct entry providers in the past 12 months?
Thanks, Will. It's great to be here and to join all of the special members this afternoon. Will, it's been quite an amazing transformation, obviously, over the past 12 months. I'm going to set all the challenges aside right now and focus this specifically on the question around direct entry programs. We, right from probably 12 months ago, I think one of the early quotes was made around 10 years of innovation in those first 10 days when our borders closed. During the year that's passed, I think particularly direct entry programs is the one where I think innovation and student value has probably resonated the most, particularly in exploring new markets. One of the really interesting sort of, I guess, findings from English Australia's perspective was in Q4 last year when we surveyed 115 colleges, predominantly member colleges. Of those, the response rate showed that students studying in that Q4, so the October, November, December period, 50% of those students were studying offshore, and 52% of those students studying online. And in fact, the balance was more offshore than it was onshore for the providers that responded. Now, within that mix of students, what we've anecdotally been informed about is the predominant student selection is to do the direct entry programs and the EAP programs in the hope and the spirit that these programs will streamline the study period in arriving in Australia. And indeed, the direct entry programs have had more of a value proposition than I would say the general English courses, namely because I think within general English the uniquely Australian experience has tended to really been a strong selling point. Both have that value add, but I think the reason for particularly picking up the online study and offshore study is just that bit stronger when you're on a pathway. So offshore delivery, new product delivery have been obviously two really significant trends that we've seen in the past 12 months. Significant changes across the assessment process, and I mean there's colleagues on this webinar far more expert than I to speak to those, but as we've tried to grapple with processes around assessment methodologies, proctoring, and ways in which assessment are now being reflected upon to I think reconsider whether what we've traditionally done is appropriate, and as we move forward, whether this is an opportunity for us to reflect and consider new ways of conducting assessment as well. And obviously integrated skills and other opportunities to look and protect particularly the assessment bank is heightened on that list. Many ways, I think the way in which this trend is emerging, it really is supporting our pipeline development. Whether in the long term we can find sustainable models that are both economically viable as well as bringing a bulk of students in through that pathway, I think is going to be need further review and insight. But overall, I think in terms of those trends, by and large, there's a lot of positive aspects that we can take out, particularly focused on direct entry programs and how we've had to adapt over the past 12 months.
Okay, great, thanks. Aparna, what about from your perspective?
It's really interesting listening to Brett outline some of those. He's already taken some of the buzzwords that we're going to be talking about today. I guess from my perspective, sitting in a direct entry pathway provider role to UNSW, there's about 3 trends I would like to maybe focus on. The first piece is, as Brett mentioned, the general English piece. We saw that as soon as 2020 hit, or at least we went online, the first thing university centers like us started thinking about was divesting that general English offering or any other long tail offering that wasn't core business. And this was specifically to start focusing on the core business, which is pathways. Unfortunately, these were very difficult decisions to make because whatever little diversity we have sits in some of those small programs like general English, study tours, etc. And these have been built up over many years. So that was a very difficult decision to make. As a consequence of that, I do think there were some positive developments where there were some very quick MOUs and articulation agreements reached between private providers and university centers. And these really helped those collaborative partnerships that we have seen initially, but that really ramped up through this outsourcing, as I call it, of general English to others who do it much better, I think. The second trend I wanted to talk about was pipelines, and Brett touched upon this already. Some trends that started becoming very visible was the transnational education footprint that centers had. People started focusing a lot more on that. And this was either to consolidate what they already had or looking at ways to expand that footprint a bit more. Because I've always believed the transnational education philosophy was before students come to Australia, how can we get them on the hook and establish direct pipelines into English programs or programs in Australia that are at the university themselves? We did see that ramp up quite a bit. The other thing that started happening was university centers and universities themselves started being courted by a lot of providers offshore, partner agencies, large organizations that did want to establish articulation agreements with the university, again, to set up those pipelines. If these pipelines get set up, we'll be in direct competition with these sources of students entering directly into the university. Brett mentioned student enrollments, and I just wanted to touch on that. The student enrollments at the beginning, of course, it was quite a strange situation where everyone was in a state of panic. We have to remember that March last year, a lot of the online testing was off the table. So students were really panicked, thinking, what's my future going to be? So in that initial period, a lot of the enrollments did hold. I mean, there was withdrawals and there was deferrals, but a lot of enrollments held. But as things started settling, standardized testing came back online, students started becoming more judicious about their choices, and they would start opting, I thought, interestingly, for the shorter pathways rather than 30 weeks commitment. Because if given a choice between doing an IELTS test and entering university versus studying 30 weeks, in a declining climate and economic reality, what would you choose? I thought some of those trends were very interesting. Teaching and learning was done differently. So these were things that I found quite telling over 2020 and 2021 as well.
Thanks, Aparna. Yeah, I think working for a university centre myself, I can certainly relate to some of those. Pankaj, what about you? I think coming from a slightly different perspective as from a private provider.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks, Brett, for the introduction. Aparna, you've sort of taken about 90% of what I was going to say, and I'm trying to think about what to say now moving forward. But I think what I'll do is I'll use an analogy, very similar to Brett's, and putting the challenges aside. But Phoenix Academy is a private pathway college in Perth. We've been here around for about 33 years now. And we work with multiple university partners in Western Australia. So, Curtin, Murdoch, ECU, both through direct entry programs as well as our English programs. We had to adapt very quickly. We went from delivering face-to-face to online in a period of about 3 to 4 weeks. And, it was a fantastic journey and learning things that you've never had to learn about. And we ended up setting up 10 hybrid classrooms within the last year, which has been exceptionally expensive. And we had to balance the needs of both the teachers teaching in a hybrid way, as well as our students learning in a hybrid way. As Brett did mention, we started off very strongly with the face-to-face students here, where classes had the majority of students face-to-face. And as we progressed a year on, probably 60% of our students are now online offshore. What did we see with these direct entry programs? We saw a decline of general English for a variety of reasons, besides the borders being closed, but students moving up the English pipeline, eventually ending up at a position where they can neither return home, nor can they at this point afford a fully fledged university degree, choosing more pathway programs to allow them a little more space to, I guess, figure out what they're going to do. Obviously, Australia is the place to be when it comes to, besides our very hard borders, but it is really a good place for an international student to be. We saw tremendous engagement by our university partners through a variety of initiatives that they brought to the plate, and that was recognizing a lot more of our courses for direct entry to build their pipeline, but also offering tremendous scholarships on top of their scholarships they're already offering. So suddenly we became we got into a very competitive hemisphere. What we saw from our competitors is that there was tremendous competition in pricing as well as commissions, and that created a whole new world of how do we compete in a declining pipeline market, but now we're competing with bigger commissions, bigger scholarships, and universities trying to build their pipeline. Phoenix's approach was that we went the other way. We talked to our agents, we had frank discussions with them, and we went reverse. So we said, we can't afford those sorts of commissions, so we'd like to talk to you about decreasing your commission and working with you in the long term. I think at that point, the board thought I was crazy, but it actually panned out quite well for us. You know, as we all know, running a class is tremendously expensive. Put hybrid into it and the costs go through the roof. So we spent an inordinate amount of time talking to our agents about reversing the clock, about 5 to 10 years where commissions were more sustainable. There was fixed pricing. We then worked through our local English Australia as well as other professional bodies like Wapetia to start talking about standardizing fees during this time so that one, that we can survive, but two, moving forward, that there is a sustainable and profitable pipeline coming through. We talked to our universities about incentives and managing fear directly related to the amount of scholarships they're offering. And I think over the period, what has happened is we've found that our students adapted much quicker than we did to this whole new world. And where we are currently at in our sort of timeline, we've seen a growth in direct entry programs to all our partners. We've seen increased retention. We're now fully committed to this whole new world of teaching online and offshore, which I think should take Will nicely onto his next question.
Yeah, thanks, Pankaj. I think you raised quite a few really good points there. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that again. I think a lot to reflect on. But as you say, yeah, that does lead on well to the next question, which is sort of, rather than looking backwards, sort of doing a bit of crystal ball gazing. And that is, do you think students will want to study online and offshore prior to coming to Australia to start their degree? So we might go back to Brett for that one to start with. Yeah, what do you think?
Thanks, Will. I'll speak a bit quicker so I make sure I don't steal everyone's content this time around. Will, short answer for me would be a yes. I do think there will be an appetite for online study prior to degree in the future. We've seen over many years the duration of student study in Australia has declined. And, you know, the average, if you just look purely at the average duration that a student's coming, and particularly where they've been coming on university-based courses, which largely sort of made up the historical bulk of direct entry and EAP. And sort of, I guess part of that proposition was English language proficiency was increasing in home country, and preparation skills and students wanting to ensure that they were as prepared as feasible in terms of coming into course. Other factors, obviously cost, in-country costs associated with offshore travel increase as well. So I guess broadly there'd been a bit of a trend already emerging pre-COVID, and I think now the use of online and study, virtual type study, will increase. Now, I don't think on a personal level it's going to decrease to a level that will cannibalize, you know, the onshore proposition, but will it be part of that proposition moving forward? Then my belief is that it will. I guess moving forward, there are going to be more questions raised around sort of regulatory controls, quality controls, you know, how does Australia position itself in that market? And there's most likely, and even, you know, Minister Tudge, I think in his speech today referenced, there are going to be fierce competition, particularly from really big aggregator sites, you know, the Amazon type sites as well. So I think students studying online offshore will continue. As a pathway to an Australian degree, I think that there's already been a demonstration of commitment from providers and investment from providers. My take is that that will probably continue as well, and with competition we'll see more innovation again, so it will be self-fulfilling in terms of why we will see more students opting to study online on pathway to an academic degree. And also, in many ways, as we hope to try and diversify market reach as well, the ability to do that through online offshore study, provides a total different opportunity in terms of marketing and student reach than what we've seen traditionally in terms of just coming into them to the offshore market. So in brief, I do think that we will see that students will want to study online. I think and offshore through various modes, and I think we'll see a growing commitment moving forward from providers to try and meet that need as well.
Okay, thanks. Aparna, what about you as Director of Studies? Do you have similar thoughts, or?
I think I'd be in agreement with Brett, and the answer is yes. But coming from our ELICOS backgrounds, I do think it's a yes with a few ELICOS type caveats. I do want to talk about the topic of the day, which is Alan Tudge's speech and articles in the media about his speech. This strategy and this vision to expand over a 10-year period the online footprint for university courses, the diversification idea, this ideal actually is something we should have a separate conversation about how achievable it is, what it means for pathway programs and so on. But I do think this is a clear indicator on the one hand that this is the way forward, or this is the way we're going to be pushed forward. So that's one piece. The second thing is I look at the evidence that has played out just over the period of March 2020 to March 2021 in each of our areas. And just from a UNSW global perspective, I looked at our numbers and we taught over 5,000 students over this period, not ELICOS only, but this was across foundation, diploma, and ELICOS. That's a huge number. So when I went back to the number, I said, who are these students? They were mostly pathway students that hung on. As Brett mentioned at the start of our conversation, the Q4 stats actually revealed that even by the end of the year, these students were hanging on. There was about 52% staying online and studying online. So I guess these are the students with that resilience that Pankaj mentioned, the adaptability. They welcomed the flexibility that we offered, the discounts. They were very welcomed by agents and students. And I guess this also shows the appetite to stay on track, and that hasn't really diminished despite declining numbers. So perhaps now we have set up an expectation from students and agents that these offerings will continue. A couple of caveats though. English as a discretionary spend has always been the case. We were always on that knife's edge where a student might opt to not study English, but do something else and then come to university. I feel that gap has revealed itself a little more over COVID and online, and we have to be on the watch for that. We have to entice them. And one way to entice a student and get them on that hook is to offer something online with, a cheap reach, incredible capacity to scale up. Maybe one last point, Will, is doing online well is something that we are now, everybody is putting a lot of thought into. This is not the emergency lift and shift approach, because online, if it's going to be successful, needs thought and investment. And we all agree this year we have less money and resources and staff than we did last year. Student outcomes have to be center of our minds. The compliance requirements and how these students are meeting their outcomes, we need to be convinced about that. And most importantly, students need to be engaged. They need to feel they're learning. Without that, online is not really going to be successful. So lots to think about, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Aparna. Pankaj, what about you? You mentioned earlier about the investment in hybrid teaching, but what are your thoughts on what students will choose to do in the future?
Thanks, Will. Yeah, and just to clarify, when I talk about the investment in hybrid teaching, it's more than just kitting out a room with televisions and microphones, and it's about professional development of our staff. It's about exactly how Aparna said, is creating a quality product instead of PDFing a document and sticking it on an online platform. It's about an engaging learning management system It's about thinking outside the box of how do you engage somebody that's stuck at home now possibly for a year. So there's a lot of factors that come into play when you do a good online program. I'm biased. I think we've got a great online program, and that's based on our retention and attrition rates. But we have spent the last 4 or 5 decades promoting Australia as a study destination. I don't think that's going to change. I think there will always be an appetite for face-to-face learning, especially when you're looking at big markets like North Asia, South Asia. It is a dream for them to come onshore and study in a mortar and stone building. I think that's not going to change. And I think if we're out to change that, I think we'll fail miserably. Is there an appetite to commence your studies while you're waiting for your visa process, or that you've got 3 to 4 months before you start your semester 1 intake? 100%. 100%. I think we need to see this as value add. I think we need to see it as a recruitment tool. One thing that we at Phoenix have seen over the last 12 months is the diversity of markets that have come on board. We're getting students from places like Madagascar and Maldives, and we haven't discounted our prices much more, but like Aparna, these students they're dedicated to getting to university. I mean, all of us on this call are from a pathway, and if our student, I would urge us to say, find one student that walks into an agent's office or a university exhibition and then says, yes, give me 40 weeks of English and a 1-year foundation program before I go to university. Their main aim is to get to the university. In some markets like North Asia and South Asia, if they can complete that pathway or part of that pathway before entering the university, it's a huge selling point because they're saving living costs, they're with their families, they're in their environment. The second thing that comes about with all of us in hybrid learning is the technology that has come, the ability for students to rewatch lectures, the ability for us to add digital activities on top of their learning. For those of you that have been in the industry for a while, if you remember the days, we used to have special focus classes, as add-on, or a free grammar session or a free pronunciation session. I think we have in the last year created a new client, a client that wants flexibility. They want to be able to start their studies now. And if they can save time and money, then they will do that. I think very similar to other industries like retail, where the old thoughts of walking into a shop are diminishing. I think we're creating a new pathway student that demands that they have this flexibility. And, I think even for the students that are here onshore, the flexibility of being able to come online if you're not feeling well, or, if something's come up and you forgot to catch that bus in the morning, but that ability not to miss class adds another advantage to them as a student, but to us as a provider as well. So I'm very keen, and I strongly believe in, I've spoken to Brett about this a few times. I think there's a whole new world coming when these borders open, and I think a whole new clientele. And we not only have to change how we teach, we have to change our marketing collateral, we have to change our thinking, we have to change our flexibility. We have a new breed of teachers, that are teaching hybrid, face-to-face and online. What do you do with these very large campuses with 50, 60 classrooms, of which, 30, 40% are now going to be empty? Is that the reality of us moving forward? But yeah, so from my side, I think it's an added advantage for us to keep going on with the online.
Yeah, a lot to consider there, definitely. And I think that leads on well to the final question. And I might take an old Q&A trick and try and ask our speakers to give a 1-minute answer, because I think it would be good for attendees to sort of reflect and discuss on some of the issues that have been raised. So the final question is, what do you see as the future for face-to-face direct entry programs? And I think we probably have already touched on it, but Brett, is there anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Will. I definitely think in terms of the future, there will be a face-to-face market. I think many of the points that have been made across the panel, that cultural experience and cultural immersion, I think, will be a big part of that proposition. Empirical data will show that students that have studied in Australia and undertaken their English and academic preparation courses in Australia have done better than traditionally through other pathways. And that's, obviously testament to the quality of the teaching, but it is also the fact that the students can be culturally immersed into Australia. They can learn a lot more around, how the university and academic environment or teaching environment operates, and those other personal skills around, finding home and network of friends and things that really value add in terms of how you pathway into study. So I think coming to Australia and undertaking face-to-face study will continue to be a strong proposition. Like I mentioned previously, I would expect to see that, whether it changes from a 20-week to a 10-week, or the shorter periods may become more of a process. And a combination of what I think has also been mentioned around using that pipeline development, really the Australian experience or education experience pre-arrival, coupled with the experience here in Australia doing that last piece of your English or the face-to-face component before moving on. So a yes for me. I think that the Australian experience is a big part of our proposition, but with some modifications.
Okay, thanks. Aparna? You're on mute.
Sorry, I'll just build on what Brett and Pankaj said. Pankaj mentioned the taster course idea, which is actually a very powerful idea. This immersion that we know is the USP of ELICOS is going to remain, but I do think we all now have a responsibility to maybe think or rethink, what does it mean to have that student in front of you in Australia, in a classroom, on campus, and rejig the course to be ready and get a house in order for when they start coming back. I really think we owe them that. In the previous landscape where there was no online threat, we could imagine face-to-face however we liked. But I think, again, now that we have a counterpoint, we've got to differentiate what that face-to-face product becomes. It is going to be a premium proposition. It is going to, we can't increase the price because we need that fees to stay viable. But what can you do to make it a premium experience for the student is going to be one of the major conversations. One last tip or experience that I've had is over 2020, a lot of universities leaned very heavily on their English centers, and we acted as guides, counselors, gatekeepers, all of those things. And in previous times, if we have struggled to establish a relationship with the university, we found that actually naturally happening over 2020. Is there a way we can leverage some of these opportunities to continue supporting student outcomes throughout their journey at the university? I do think we have a role to play. So some of these ideas to consider when rejigging that face-to-face product.
Okay, yeah, I can see some crossover there with the PL SIG as well.
Absolutely.
And Pankaj, what about you on the future of face-to-face direct entry programs?
Yeah, I think we've invested too much and we've built such a strong brand globally that face-to-face will continue. I think it's that experience and that immersion is critical to the student journey. It's not about just getting a qualification. It's about what comes with that qualification as well. But similar to what Aparna and Brett have said, the use of online and hybrid teaching is looking at opening new markets. It's looking at opening new programs, both in transnational as well as domestically. Phoenix has experienced that with our online face-to-face. We finally managed to get out into regional WA to some domestic students that can't come right now because of what's going on in their life, but they can commence those studies now and then come face-to-face when they're here. So we haven't really had those international in the regional areas, but domestically, it's opening up a new market for us as well. Transnationally, it's opening up a new market for us through, what Aparna said earlier about new articulations and transnational opportunities where students are maybe co-studying programs Maybe they're doing an IB and a foundation, or maybe they're doing an A-levels and a diploma. And we've had success in this area as well with working in Southeast Asia as well. So yeah, I think face-to-face is here to stay. I don't think that will change, hopefully. But I've also learned that things change very quickly. So wait and see.
Great. Excellent. Thanks. Well, thank you again to Brett, Aparna and Pankaj for making the time to share your insights with us. That was really valuable. Certainly lots to go away and think about there. So we've got about 10 minutes left. What we're going to do now is put people into breakout rooms of 4. We have got some guiding questions, which we'll share in the chat once you're in the breakout rooms. And they are, what were the key points you took from that discussion? And what do you see as the future for direct entry programs? So we won't have time for to get feedback as a whole group at the end. So this is sort of more of a chance for you to just have a chat with some of your peers on what you learned from that. So Sophie, I might hand over to you if you're able to put us into rooms. Okay, thanks everyone. I think we've got everyone back. So we'll wrap it up there. I hope that was a good opportunity to share a few thoughts with peers. Once again, thanks to Brett, Aparna and Pankaj for sharing your thoughts with us today. As I mentioned, this is just the first session for the Direct Entry Program SIG. Our second session is on the 1st of June, a couple of months away. The topic of that one is teaching, engaging academic speaking and writing online. And we're really pitching that session towards teaching staff and practitioners of direct entry programs. And we're going to get a few guest speakers for that session as well. So we'll promote that a bit closer to the time, but hope to see you all there. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. And yeah, see you next time.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks.
Thank you. Panel.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks to Will and to the other SIG conveners for organising today's session. So to Livia and Maria as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.